Welcome everyone to our Food for Thought webinar, where today we're going to talk about logical fallacies in food and nutrition, how to spot them, and how to diffuse them. My name is Gwendolyn Jones. I'm the Executive Director here at IFENS, and we are so glad that you are joining us. We know from our registrations that we've got a number of folks who are new to IFENS, or the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences. So if you would indulge us, I'll give a brief review on who we are as an organization. First, I want to note we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization that is founded on 4 core values: scientific integrity, transparency, collaboration, and public benefit. As an organization, IFENS mobilizes our membership from government, industry, and academia to drive, fund, and lead actionable science. We are focused in the food safety and nutrition sciences space, and all of our work is focused on supporting public health. We catalyze the creation of scientific knowledge by funding external researchers and convening experts to support positive change. Our collaborative and inclusive structure empowers our membership to bring forward the diverse perspectives of the entire food and beverage ecosystem. Since we are on the GoToWebinar platform and we are all still spending parts of our days on different meeting platforms, we did want to take a moment and orient everyone to this GoToWebinar platform. What this slide is highlighting is how to interact with the control panel. The first thing to note is that control panel, which more than likely is on the right-hand side. There's a red/orange arrow on the top. And by pushing that orange/red arrow, you can expand and contract the size of the dialog box. We hope, of course, that you do spend a little bit of time with it expanded, because there's a question box, and we encourage you to type your questions and your comments into this box. The questions and comments that are typed in are only seen by staff. They are not visible to other attendees. So feel free to write anything you would like. Additionally, we would encourage you to type in your comments and your questions as you have them, okay? That way, we will be able to bring them forward, because as we go through the presentation today, there's going to be opportunities for all of you, for us to ask your questions that you've typed in, to provide the comments that you've typed in, as well as we're going to have some interactive quizzes. So we definitely want you guys using that question box. Now, we are pleased to note that today's webinar is approved for 1 CPEU credit by the Commission on Dietetic Registrations. IFENS is an approved provider of CEU credits, and the way this will work is that a link will be shared with participants after the webinar, and it'll be from clicking on that link that you can access the CEU certificate. So with that organizational information underway, I'd like to take a moment and introduce both Leah McGrath and Melanie Trasick King. Leah McGrath is a registered dietitian and is a respected social media and influencer in the space. This includes her founding of Build Up RDNs. Leah has a BS in human nutrition from the University of Maryland and attended a U.S. Army internship. While in the Army, Leah served as the chief of clinical dietetics at Fort Jackson Army Hospital in South Carolina. After fulfilling her active duty responsibilities, she worked in public health in WIC and nutrition director in the Low Country Health District in Beaufort, South Carolina. And since 2000, Leah has been the corporate dietitian at Ingalls Markets. Melanie Tracy King created Thinking is Power, and she serves as an associate professor at Massasoit Community College. Melanie has over 20 years experience in teaching college and high school students, and it was in that time that she realized the need to focus a course that was less on memorizing and more on thinking and science as a way of knowing. Melanie has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So with that, we're going to hand over the presentation to Leah and to Melanie to share with us all we need to know about logical fallacies, how to spot them, and how to diffuse them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gwendolyn, for the invitation to present this talk on logical fallacies in food and nutrition. Just to give you a little bit of a background on where this kind of came from, I had written an article on logical fallacies in food and nutrition, and Gwendolyn spotted it because she is one of my social media friends and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a talk about the article that I'd written. And I thought, who better to co-present with me than Melanie Tracy King, who has spent a lot of her career helping her students understand more about critical thinking and about logical fallacies and how to spot them. So I am very honored to speak today with Melanie, and you will see us kind of tag teaming this event. So we'll be going back and forth on this presentation.
Leah, I think you accidentally hit mute.
So today the goals are to identify some of the most common logical fallacies we see in food and nutrition, and hopefully to give you an ability to think about these logical fallacies critically and how to respond to these logical fallacies. And these logical fallacies are ones that we don't just see in packaging, but we also see them in social media. We see them in advertisements, we see them in commercials. So we want to make sure that when we leave here today, that you will understand about some of these fallacies and what you're seeing and what's going on behind them. Melanie?
I am honored to be here as well, and thank you so much, Leah, for the invitation. And Gwendolyn, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So fallacies are essentially errors in reasoning, and there's about a gazillion of them. I don't think I'm overestimating. And each one goes by about a gazillion different names, and they have lots of overlap between them. But what's most important is to recognize that these are attempts to persuade without evidence. And so there are some that are very common in the food and nutrition space, and those are the ones we're going to be talking about. The reason we want to learn these fallacies is so that we don't be fooled by others. And also, we make arguments to ourselves all the time, and we can even make fallacies to ourselves, reason illogically. And so what we want to do is spot these really common fallacies and recognize that this is a potential persuasion without evidence, and so not be fooled by them. There are some key reasons why this is important. Fallacies are everywhere. The first is that it encourages beliefs in pseudoscience. So fallacies are really common. Science is, at its nature, using evidence to come to a conclusion. Pseudoscience convinces without evidence, with low quality evidence, with cherry picked evidence. And so fallacies are very common in this pseudoscience space. Along those lines, when pseudoscientific beliefs often involve throwing some sort of shade on the process of science. And so here's why you should trust us, enter logical fallacy. You should not then trust, enter any number of scientific institutions. So beliefs in these pseudoscientific beliefs, it by definition has to sow distrust in the process of science and experts and nutritionists and how we grow food. And so we want to make sure that that we are following evidence and not being misled by biases and fallacies.
You know, I think that's such a great point, Melanie. And as a dietitian, and I know there's probably a number of dietitians in this webinar today in the audience, what our biggest concern oftentimes is the use of these fallacies, these appeal to logical fallacies, also creates food fears. And this can become a very serious situation for many people. And I see this on a regular basis as a supermarket dietitian, that people are buying or not buying food, not necessarily based on how much it costs, but because they've read something online that's made them afraid to buy something, or afraid not to buy something. So we want to kind of identify and recognize that that is a really big problem of these logical fallacies. We also see that at the worst case scenario, it can actually kind of exacerbate or create a situation where people become so preoccupied with certain claims on food or labels or seeking out certain foods that they can get into a situation that's known as orthorexia, which is a type of eating disorder where people feel that they need to buy certain foods based on labels, whether they're clean and air quotes food or organic foods, and that can create health problems and of course cost quite a bit of money if it's out of their economic ability to buy these foods. And a really good example of how these logical fallacies can result in a waste of money is the gluten-free. You know, gluten-free products have been around for quite some time. In the early 2000s, we saw a lot of celebrities sort of embrace the idea that gluten-free was healthier, better for you, or could actually be a weight loss diet. And we know that gluten-free is a medically necessary diet for people with celiac disease. That's about 1% of the US population, about 1 in 133 people. So when we saw this big explosion in gluten-free products, it wasn't for the celiac population, it was for the people who had been convinced through the use of these logical fallacies that these products were better or healthier for them. So the facts and figures on gluten-free is that it just exploded, and in 2021, the gluten-free market represented $1.9 billion in sales. And what's concerning about the money aspect of it is many times these gluten-free products are more expensive by quite a bit than their non-gluten-free counterparts. I think the figure was in 2019, the estimate was they were an average of 181% higher in cost than the non-gluten-free counterparts. So Melanie, why don't we give people a look at what some of the fallacies we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the money. It's not funny, but I often talk to my students about why they should care about these things, and the joke in class is always that I'm really cheap, so I don't want to waste my money. But we have to be motivated to think critically. Like if you're not motivated to identify these fallacies and the attempts to persuade, then you're not going to stop and think about it. So the motivation is really important. Money is a good motivator for me, whatever it is for anybody else. So Again, there's about a gazillion logical fallacies. These were the ones that we identified that were the most common in the food and nutrition space. So this is what we're going to be spending our time on for the rest of the presentation before the quiz. So get ready for the quiz.
So on to you for the very first one.
Oh yeah, the first one is a biggie in that it is probably the most prevalent in health, wellness, nutrition, etc. So the appeal to nature fallacy argues that something that is natural or perceived to be natural is better and or safer than something that isn't. And this fallacy appears in a variety of different ways, as you can see in the graphics here. This exploits our bias of nature. A lot of us think that natural is, peaceful and safe and something better for us. So there's a couple problems with this fallacy. So the first is that it's actually hard to define what natural is. Is plastic natural? I mean, it comes from oil. Oil is natural, right? A lot of antibiotics come from nature. So are they natural? At what point does something stop becoming natural? So this is often a false dichotomy between something that is natural or not natural. And it's harder to define than you think it is. The second problem is that we can't assume that something is good or safe based on whether it's natural. There are a lot of things in nature that can kill you, harm you. I mean, sharks, poison ivy, botulinum, viruses, any number of things, right? Some would argue that science is actually a process of trying to save us from nature. Also, there are a lot of unnatural things by our definition that are good for us. Flushing toilets, I greatly appreciate. Things, right? So we can't decide whether something is safe or not, or better or not, based on whether it's perceived to be natural. The natural cure diet there, I just want to point out really quickly, that's one of the most dangerous forms, I think, of the appeal to nature, is these kinds of diets that can cure. Diets can't cure something like cancer. Chemotherapy is not, I would say, natural, but is definitely a better chance at surviving cancer than a diet.
So this is one of my favorites, Melanie, about that this was actually this image from the all natural bananas from several years ago. I believe it was a chemist or a teacher out of Australia who came up with this image of the all natural banana to counteract that idea of chemophobia that people have, that the fear of chemical sounding words.
Yeah, so this actually overlaps with another fallacy, which is the appeal to emotions we're going to get to in a second. But yeah, these sorts of fears of chemicals. So the next slide has a sort of summary of the appeal to nature. This is a graphic that I created on my website and for my students. The appeals to nature are extraordinarily common because advertisers know that they convince us. And so what I've tried to put on the left here are the various ways this appears. Chemical-free, clean green, nature's best remedies, organic, bio, all of those are a form of appeal to nature. So this is how that you might see it in various forms. And the reason that it's fallacious is because natural can be harmful and synthetic can be good. And also, as a reminder, like, what is natural? It is hard to define. So don't be fooled by this fallacy. It is very common.
So the next fallacy is this appeal to tradition. And here's a cover of a book, The Caveman Diet, but we're probably more familiar with the paleo diet. So that appeal to tradition, ancestry, and this is really pretty closely aligned many times with the appeal to natural. So implying that ancestral or traditional methods of food, of health, were somehow better or better for us than what we currently have. And it's places us in a position of denying any kind of advances we have in science or health or medicine or food safety even. And what's most ironic a lot of times about these people who are claiming that we should be eating like our ancestors or ancestral practices or better is they're carrying around basically a computer in their back pocket to kind of figure it out and tweet these things out. So they are very selective about how far back they want to go with their traditions and their appeal to tradition. One of the biggest culprits in this area is Michael Pollan. And, you know, I must admit I have a little bit of a grudge against Michael Pollan, and it was really based on the fact that I had a lot of customers come to me and start to kind of spout off all these sayings from Michael Pollan. I call them Pollanisms or pollinated. And one in particular that he used quite frequently, or you would see quite frequently, probably in the early and mid 2000s, was don't eat anything your great grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. I'm sure a lot of people listening today recall that. And that just used to really bug me, even long before I understood what logical fallacies were, because I wasn't lucky enough to be one of Melanie's students, so I was never trained in logical fallacies. So when I dug a little bit deeper into Michael Pollan and how he had kind of gotten in the space of writing some of these food rules, I discovered, especially for this one, that he had changed it progressively. As you see, starting in 2006, it was don't eat anything your great-great-great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. About 7 months later, he had dropped a generation and it became don't eat anything your great-great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. And by 2008, when he came out with the Omnivore's Dilemma on an NPR interview, it had become, if your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize it as food, then neither should you. And I found that very suspect, that you can just continuously drop a generation as it kind of suits your narrative or your mood. But again, that's that appeal to tradition. And what's also kind of annoying about the appeal to tradition, especially for many people, is that their grandparents, or certainly their great-grandparents, may not have grown up in a very safe or privileged environment, and they may not have had access to food on a regular basis, or clean water, or running water. So there may be many foods that they wouldn't have recognized, things like tofu, mango, hummus. One of the things I've done in presentations is just talk about processed foods, because that's really what Michael Pollan is referring to, that he's implying that our ancestors, our grandparents, our great-grandparents weren't eating processed foods, so neither should we. But if you look at all these products that you could find in almost any supermarket in the United States, chips, Coca-Cola, Hershey bar, we can see when they were introduced into the market in the United States, the latter half of the 19th century, the early 20th century. So our grandparents, our great-grandparents would have easily recognized all of these foods and may not have recognized that mango, that hummus, or that tofu.
Very common fallacy, the appeal to tradition. It shows up in a lot of different ways too. Appeal to authority is another common fallacy. This one basically asserts that something is true based on the position of an assumed authority. This is actually a pretty dicey fallacy, so get into the weeds here for a second. The easiest way to recognize this fallacy is the use of celebrities, athletes, and various people who aren't qualified at all as endorsing a product. So we can see here with LeBron James and McDonald's, which he almost certainly does not actually eat. The problem is that science has experts, and authorities aren't experts. Experts aren't authorities. Experts use evidence, whereas authorities are using their position of authority. We do want to be able to follow expert advice. And so following expert advice, accepting expert advice is not an appeal to authority. The appeal to authority is fallacious when the authority isn't an expert. So LeBron James isn't an expert in food. He's just selling McDonald's here. The authority, if the authority is an expert in a different area, this is a bit trickier. So let's say somebody has a doctorate, but it's English literature, and they are making a claim about food, then that's clearly outside their area of expertise. So that is also an appeal to authority. We see this a lot with in health and wellness and nutrition, with things like influencers and fitness trainers and so on. This space is really full of people who don't have the qualifications to make the claims that they're making. The more difficult way that this fallacy shows up is when the authority makes a claim that might actually be an expert in an area, but the authority is making a claim that's counter to the expert consensus. So an expert consensus is when the collective evidence and then experts agree on the evidence and will, it's really in science, the best we have to go by. However, you can always find an expert who has a counter opinion. You can always find somebody with a PhD or an MD, even in their field of expertise, who's a contrarian in some way. And in the health and wellness space, this tends to show up as something like this. So Mark Hyman is an MD, and he's making a claim here about how food is medicine. So food is important to health, but food is not medicine. So he is clearly making a claim that's contrary to the consensus. It might be worth pointing out that while he makes these claims on his website, he sells supplements that are essentially, I don't know, repackaged food as medicine, sold with extraordinary markups. So they're saving money again. The point here, the bottom line, and I'd like Leah to weigh in this a bit more if she's up for it, but if you're going to use an authority or an expert to make an argument, it should be one who has the expertise to do so and who is in line with what the evidence says. Otherwise, it's an appeal to authority.
Yeah, I think, what is most galling about, and, Mark Hyman is not the only one, but most galling about this kind of situation is when people say one thing and then, like, food is medicine, but then they sort of counteract that very claim by promoting supplements that are minimally regulated and may or may not have benefit, may be very expensive, and may actually be detrimental in some cases. So I think that's definitely a very big red flag, is supplement sales like that. So,
notice what he's doing here. He's using his position to throw shade on science and exactly. To sell his supplement.
But here's the one, Melanie, that you and I both, I think, and this was a great example that you gave, appeal to emotion, where it's using emotion to persuade without any evidence. And here's a picture of a dog and a cat. I have 2 dogs. Melanie, you have 1 cat, 2 cats?
I have a cat, yeah.
Howling
in the back.
So we love our pets. So there are certain images that are used in advertising and in social media that really can evoke a lot of emotions for us. Infants, children, elderly people, our pets, they can all evoke emotions. And some of those emotions may be, a lot of tenderness, a lot of heartfelt emotion. You can also evoke more negative, strong emotions like anger and even hatred, I guess, at some level. But those are when people are manipulated in that way, with that appeal to emotions, we tend to shut off. We have our emotional brain on. We turn off our rational, our logical, our critical thinking brain on, because, oh, look at that cute dog, or that sweet little baby, or that helpless elderly person. So we're turning off our thinking brain, our logical brain, we're turning on emotions. And many marketers, influencers really attempt to tap into those emotional well springs in customers in order to sell products, whether it's supplements or food products or health products. And that's a very common logical fallacy as well.
So the appeal to masses asserts that something is true or it's better because it's popular. Humans are social animals, and so this fallacy can be very convincing. It shows up things like everybody knows, or many people say. Advertisers will say, well, America's favorite cereal. I mean, that's great. Let's assume that this is the most purchased cereal. What does that tell us about the benefits of the cereal? All it tells us is that a lot of people buy it. So the problem with appeal to masses is that it convinces us through social pressure without evidence. Trends have a way of catching on. So let's say that there's a diet that becomes really popular and you start seeing it everywhere. Around the new year, you start to see detoxes everywhere, or you start to see, let's say that the new diet is, I can't keep up, what, paleo, that's old news. Anyway, we see those trends, and the more we see them, and the more we think they catch on, the more they convince us that there's something that is worth trying, because that many people can't be wrong, right? Of course they can. That many people can be wrong. So popularity does not determine truth. And we want to make sure then that we're not being convinced through social pressure or the appearance of social pressure.
Here's another one of my favorites, Melanie. So correlation is not causation.
Yeah, this fallacy is really hard, and we have to catch ourselves doing this. We fall for it ourselves without having somebody convince us. The idea here is, so humans look for patterns. We're constantly trying to figure out why things happen. And so we notice events and things, and then we think, well, this must cause that. This graphic here shows autism and organic food sales over time. And so what we see is there's a correlation. So a correlation is when things occur together. Causation is when one thing causes something else. Let's say, for example, every morning the rooster crows and the sun rises. And then the rooster crows and the sun rises. Is the rooster causing the sun to rise? I mean, that's obviously an obvious example, but let's say that you ate a sandwich for lunch and then you threw up later. Was it the sandwich or was it something else? I mean, there could be any number of things. Our brain is trying to figure out why. And our biases then lead us to that explanation. Just because two things occur together does not mean one caused the other. And actually establishing causation is really difficult. Do organic food sales cause autism? Does autism cause organic food sales? Right. Or maybe there's something behind both of them and they've just increased over time. The bottom line here is we do this to ourselves all the time. We're constantly looking for patterns and explanations. So we want to notice this in ourselves and try to figure out if we can determine causality and what other ways of explaining our observation can we find, right? Don't just fall for the first one that catches your fancy. So recognize the difference and don't be fooled by this.
And here's one this time of year. Gosh, I feel like every time I turn the television on, I see some example of anecdotal or testimonial testimonies being used to promote some sort of supplement, weight loss supplement, a diet program, a weight loss program, you name it. They really rely heavily on anecdotes and testimonies. And a lot of times it's because they lack the hard evidence, the science-based evidence, or the research to support them. So anecdotes and testimonies really tap again into that emotional space that we have, where we see somebody maybe that conveys an experience that was similar to something that we're having, or they may look like somebody that may look more like us so we can relate to them. So again, we sort of override our logical brain and we forget about the fact that that anecdote is one person or one or two people, or that testimony is just one person's experience. And we sort of transpose that on a much wider audience. If it worked for Sheila, it may work for me. If it worked for my neighbor, Debbie, it will probably work for me. Or Debbie said it worked for her, so I tried it. So again, this is more of an appeal to our emotions and how we take in data and information. It's a lot easier to take in this kind of soft information, these anecdotes and testimonies, than it is to really understand the science and the research. So here is my woo words or fallacy flags bingo card. So over time, I noticed that there were a lot of there's buzzwords that seem to change every couple of years. And I noticed that many of them sort of repeated themselves when it came to certain influencers or certain websites. And so in the back of my mind, I realized that I had kind of a running list of these woo words or weasel words or fallacy flags that I would use when I would take a look at a website or an influencer's feed. Nick Tiller, who will give you his name as a resource, had a really good point about these words. None of these words individually have any agency. He talks about that point. But it is the principle is like bingo. When you start to see multiple examples of these words on a website, you get to the point where you say, oh, this person is really promoting a lot of pseudoscience. This person is really deploying a lot of fallacies. So these words a lot of times are these little red flags. They're the cautions for me that the pseudoscience is going to follow, that there's fallacies that are going to follow. Individually, they may have little or no agency or weight, but when you see see them used multiple times or in multiple combinations on the same website by the same person, then you should really proceed with caution. This other example is something that I see quite frequently, and this is in the supermarket. When you take a product, and it could be a cookie, a candy, it could be any number of products, which if we say the word cookie or we say the word candy, we don't necessarily equate that with health. But by putting certain labels on a product, we start to think, oh, well, maybe this is a better for you option. And in this example here, you can see that it says crafted with only clean ingredients. Well, hopefully everything that you eat is crafted with only clean ingredients. But this also has a lot of other words, or these weasel words, or these woo words and symbols on it that might make you think that this is actually a healthier cookie than other cookies. It's gluten-free, it's dairy-free, it's vegan, it's peanut-free, it's non-GMO, but it's still a cookie. Even with all those health halo words, it's still a cookie. So up next, Melanie, do you want to talk, since you're the teacher in the group, you want to talk about our quiz?
Yeah, I couldn't resist. It's quiz time. Practice, right? So what's on here are the fallacies that we've talked about and some of the woo words to pay attention to. And so we're going to show you some and give you a few seconds really, to put something in the chat, and then we will come back and talk about what you find. But please try to practice what you see. That's the point of this, right?
Right. Okay, look at this one, Melanie. Detox, cleanse, everyone is talking about. Boy, I don't know.
Well, I don't know if everybody's talking about it. Maybe I should try it.
Everybody, and it's detox. Yeah, I thought your liver and your kidney were all you needed to detox, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that your
Yeah.
impression?
Like, don't get me started on that one, because you can't detox with a product labeled detox. There's a medical reason for detox. If something says detox, it's a pretty good, like red flag that it's a scam. But yeah, they're trying to talk you into this one by saying everyone's talking about it. So what do you think?
I don't know. Like, do we have anybody who's answered, Gwendolyn?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at the answers coming in, and I'm going to say kudos to both of you, because what we're seeing is appeal to masses as probably the #1 trending
There you go.
response here. So looks like you guys got that across. Although I will also note, and I think this might be worth perhaps a commentary on. There are some other questions around emotional response. Is this playing on emotions too?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gwendolyn. I think the word like cleanse could definitely evoke some emotion. What do you think, Melanie?
Yeah, and I think detox is one of those
Yeah.
scary words.
Yeah, one of
Yeah.
the woo words, one of the scary words. So that's a good one. All right, let's go on to our next one. Ooh, this is obviously not something you'd see on the shelf, right, Melanie? This is not a
No, so
worthy package.
this came from Greenpeace, and is an anti-GMO argument. And there are a lot of anti-GMO arguments that are fallacious. Like, I don't know, they're all natural. GMOs aren't natural, Leah, and your great grandparents wouldn't have eaten them, right? So that's an appeal to nature tradition. But what's on this image? I'm curious what people think. Do we have any answers yet?
Yeah, any answers yet, Gwendolyn?
Let's see. What we're seeing is I'm seeing a mix. Part of it being appeal to nature and appeal to emotion and appeal to tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
this
funny.
one's hard. I think this is like a graduate level quiz. Sorry.
I think, when we were talking about this, Melanie and I, the use of this like iconic character, Tony the Tiger, I think there is a certain amount of appeal to tradition to that. Wouldn't you agree, Melanie?
Yeah. Although what really stuck out to me, and the feedback is really nice, what really stuck out to me when I saw this was I was supposed to be afraid of GMOs.
Right. So emotion, right? Yeah.
There are a lot of arguments that are appeal to nature and appeal to tradition, and there's probably some on there, but Frankenfood's bad and Gene Splicer and like that. Yeah.
Scary face.
Really,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think it's important that we emphasize that, some of these are not a cut and dried, this is only one logical fallacy. And you'll find that a lot of times there's more than one logical fallacy being used at the same time. Oh, here's a good one.
Yeah, if an argument is fallacious, probably fallacious in multiple levels, or it might be. But yes, here we have the Liver King, Leah.
I mistakenly called him the Lion King when we were practicing. So not the Lion King.
So very famous for raw liver and raw all kinds of things, because they are the ways of our ancestors.
Yeah.
In a primal way.
Primal. So this should be a pretty straightforward one. Has anybody gotten right, Gwendolyn?
It is all showing up as appeal to tradition.
There we go. So, and one of the other aspects of this that we should probably mention is that it came out that he was taking a lot of steroids, and his incredible physique was not necessarily due to his liver, but all the steroids he was taking. So does that pull in another logical fallacy, Melanie?
Yeah, okay, so this is really one of the reasons anecdotes are bad evidence. anecdotes, we can misperceive our experiences. We can also lie. And he was lying. He was misrepresenting how he achieved that physique. That's steroids. It's not raw liver.
Yeah. So we are probably, are we getting close to the end, Gwendolyn, that we need to pause for some questions, or do we have time for one more?
You know, let's do one more because we're getting some great feedback, right? And let's do one more, and then we'll take the questions that have come in. So let's do one more. Thanks,
Great.
guys.
Okay, this is one that I spotted the other day, and I forget where I saw this. I think on Facebook. Only eat fruit with seeds. Stay away from seedless fruit. Oh no! Nature never creates anything without the ability to reproduce. So this is, there's a lot, well, actually, this is pretty straightforward, don't you think, Melanie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. It shows why this fallacy is a fallacy. Plant sex is actually pretty kinky, and plants do stuff all the time, and they do hybridize on their own, and there are hybrids that are infertile. And is hybridizing unnatural? I don't know. So I just gave it away. I'm hoping everybody saw this is an appeal to
Everybody
nature.
had learned the lesson, and the answers were coming in as appeal to nature. So nice job. Thanks.
There we go.
So, yeah.
One more
yeah.
in, can
But
we?
I'd like to, there we go. Go ahead,
Well,
please.
Well, we'll go, no, we can, we'll quickly go through our last couple slides and then
Perfect.
take any questions. So, you know, we wanted to give you some things to take away from this. What can you do? First of all, you've already done it. Be able to recognize some of these logical fallacies. Even if you may not know exactly which ones are being used, just that you kind of have that recognition, something's going on here. And that will help you to think critically about perhaps how you're being manipulated as a consumer, as a parent, as a shopper, an eater, whatever. So recognize, and then to be able to refute, think critically. And Melanie, how about you take the last two?
Yeah, so responding is tricky, because if we're talking about responding to someone else, it really depends on what your relationship with that person is, and what you're trying to accomplish. I always tell my students that the first step, it's easier to recognize these in someone else than it is ourselves. But don't go around pointing it out all the time, because people don't tend to like that. But the goal is to spot them in ourselves. And if you've gotten to a place where you can respond with empathy to someone and kindly tell them about why that reasoning is fallacious, and more importantly, so the goal here is to make better decisions. And to do that, we need to think better. And so to refine our own thinking and not be misled, and then if we can help others do the same thing.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. So Gwendolyn, do we have some questions that we want to go over?
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask the question and then let you guys answer. And this is a good one that's come in. So you're on the phone with a dear relative with whom you haven't spoken in quite a while. And they say, you know, I've had so many problems for so long, but you know what? I've been on this carnivore diet for 3 months and I feel amazing.
Oh, wow. Well,
This is apparently a true story. Is there anything you can do in the context of logical fallacies here, or is it just too late?
Well, hopefully, as a dietitian, I'm hoping it's not too late. So you never, of course, want to acknowledge and have, as Melanie said, have empathy with somebody's very true feelings and concerns. So if the person feels better on a carnivore diet, the question might be why. So, you know, unless you are their physician or their dietitian, you may not be entitled to know that information. The carnivore diet, for those of you who aren't aware, is like pretty much a strictly meat diet, which I would say would be difficult to maintain for on a long-term basis. And there may be long-term side effects from being on a diet like that. So the real question would be, I guess for me as a dietitian, I wonder why this person feels better eating this way. Did they have some levels of intolerance to certain foods, or do they have irritable bowel? What's going on that eating this way does make them feel better? And so maybe it's the start. Instead of thinking that you're trying to solve a problem, think of it in terms of a start of a conversation about if that person wants to have a conversation about that. But yeah, that's tricky with relatives and with food. And I would say, are you seeing a dietitian and talking to a dietitian about that? That might be what I would say if it was my relative.
Great, thanks so much. So another question's come in. You guys nicely laid out several common logical fallacies, but maybe there's a little bit more for Melanie to think about. Is there another one or two that's worth kind of bringing forward for us to consider as we are all now contemplating logical fallacies?
Yeah, I think probably some of the other big ones would be ad hominem, which is an attack on the person. It's commonly used by people who are trying to discount mainstream or accepted science. They will call that person a shill, or say they are somehow taking money for. It's a very common tactic in science denial. And along those lines, there is also the straw man. So the straw man misrepresents someone's position to make it easier to defeat. And it's extraordinarily common in the science denial space. The best way to defeat a scientific position is to misrepresent it in the first place. So making sure that, again, these are a lot of logical fallacies. And, I probably say there's like 12 to 15 very common ones. Those are the ones I give my students. The most important thing, like Leah said, is to recognize that something is wrong. Like something doesn't seem right. Lean into that skepticism, and then try to figure out what exactly the problem is.
That's great.
Great,
Anything?
Thanks. So another question, this is probably really for both of you, and it's referencing, Leah, some of the postings that you apparently have done recently on Build Up Dietitians, or Build Up Dietitians, where you talk about how the plural of an anecdote is anecdotes and it's not data, right? Which, I mean, candidly, it's what you guys have been listening in on my phone calls to some of my relatives, because I'm like, and that's an anecdote, and that's another anecdote, and you can't draw a correlation. There's no correlation, and there's no causation, is always my answer, and then nobody pays attention to me after that. But could you guys talk kind of, both of you, about a systematic way to kind of something more around anecdotes versus, I'm going to say, proof and reproducibility and stuff like that?
Well, I think that when people, if you put forth, I don't know, an argument about something, whether it's about a food or diet or medication or treatment, and the person's response starts with I, that's a red flag. Like, or I, or my, or me, or my experience. That's kind of a red flag that they're relaying an anecdote, their personal anecdote, and it's not like anecdotes are totally invalid, but they're not the same as doing scientific research and collecting evidence in an organized scientific way. And Gwendolyn, we could have just had you do that one because you explained it perfectly. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, you can do all these anecdotes that you want. You can see it all the time on television with these diet products, but that doesn't mean that these things work. That doesn't qualify them as being scientific research or evidence. What about you, Melanie? What would you say?
Yeah, I find that this is one of the most difficult fallacies because people trust their experiences. Like we trust it happened to me, so it must be true. And we don't understand all of the ways that we can mislead ourselves. So it, for me, comes back to people not understanding why anecdotes aren't good evidence to begin with. Stories are relatable, they're emotional, they're much more convincing than data, unfortunately. And they're also cheap, right? If I'm a pseudoscience company, if I'm a health food company and I'm going to put something out, I'm just going to put somebody's picture with a story and it's going to work so much better. And I'm not going to have to spend money on a study. So getting people though to understand why the experience is not proof, why that evidence is lacking is really important. I have, you know, tell students about my ghost story where, you know, I was misled, you know, the Liver King lied, you know, there are reasons why we can't trust personal experiences. That's a really hard lesson. It's an important lesson for critical thinking, the limits of our personal experiences, but it's difficult and it can be disconcerting for some.
Yeah. Well, we
That's
have,
great.
yeah,
Please go ahead, Leah.
we have one more slide with some of our resources. If we want us to
Okay.
go to that one, Lynn, in the last minute or two that we have.
I was absolutely going to say, let's go ahead and give you guys back the presenting rights real quick. Here we go.
Okay, so here's some of the resources, and I realize, much to my embarrassment, I have Craig Goo instead of Craig Good. Something happened to my D. So here are some websites that I think are, and social media handles that I think are definitely worth following, both individuals and groups. Some different books that have really helped me to learn quite a bit about pseudoscience, critical thinking, quackery, logical fallacies. In particular, I definitely want to give a shout out to Tim Caulfield, who has been outstanding in this field and has been a huge resource for me and for many other people as well. And then here are our websites and our Twitter handles, Facebook handles for both Melanie, for both of us. You can find us on pretty much all the socials, and be sure to follow us. Melanie has a lot of great resources on her Thinking is Power website for you, you know, in terms of visuals and skeptical thinking, critical thinking resources. So I thank you, Iphans, for allowing us to do this webinar. Thank you, Melanie, for doing it with me. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. This was such a wonderful exploration of fallacies. I really appreciated it.
No, thank you guys both for joining us today, right? This has been really a very interactive audience. I'll note with that, we hope folks who are joining us do continue to join us as we connect, collaborate, and catalyze science that matters. The easiest way to keep track of different educational opportunities that we offer, right, is to candidly check that website at ifans.org, follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And as a reminder, the access to the CEU credits for RDNs will be coming out later this afternoon with the link for you to click on. So with that, I want to thank Leah and Melanie so sincerely for joining us today. It's been a great discussion, different exploration, and I know everybody learned something, which is the goal for these food for thought webinars. And I want to also thank our audience for their participation and their engagement this afternoon. So
Thank
with
you.
that, I hope everybody has a good rest of their day, and thanks again, Melanie and Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you.